People say that they are awake and aware. But did you realize that you can be awake and not aware, or aware but not awake? Because the two things are not exactly the same. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in the video for this week. This week begins the 15th of May 2023. My name is Karen from karenturpin.com. Now, when we say somebody is awake, it means fully conscious, alert, and not asleep. Lately, we refer to someone as being asleep when they are also referred to as being a sheep. You probably know what I mean by that. Whereas being aware is having knowledge or perception of a situation or a fact. So the two are slightly different, but we tend to use them interchangeably as well, don't we? So I've noticed over the last 3 years in particular that many people are one or the other, but very often not both. There are some of us that are both as well, of course. People say to me that they had their spiritual awakening at the start of the pandemic. Well, clearly they're aware that it's a pandemic, not a pandemic. But the point is that we don't have just one spiritual experience. It's really a process of awakening that goes on for years, lifetimes probably. And being spiritually awake to everything in one hit particularly would have to include everything that's in the whole universe, really, and beyond that universe. So I'm not sure how we could really do that in the current human form that we have, because actually the sheer voltage of holding that amount of power in our physical body as it currently is probably wouldn't be possible. However, let's not get too involved in that. Let's just say that we have a spiritual awakening and we start at some point, and then hopefully we have more and more and more of those on our path, and it opens up to greater awareness, let's say. So, in my opinion, being spiritually awake is opening up and having and building a connection and sustaining a connection with the divine, with Source, with God, with the universe, whichever of those terms is most comfortable for you. I do tend to use them interchangeably. And we get that spiritual connection, that levels of awakening, through the connection with the divine, not through connecting to the smaller pockets of information that we tend to find in New Age beliefs and New Age modalities. So we have to really go beyond that, because many of those New Age teachings hold us really quite small and limited. And I've talked about that in many classes and articles that I've written about the false ascension matrix over the years, or the New Age deception, things like that. Now, I'm not really sure 100% what people mean when they say that they've had a spiritual awakening. What did they wake up to exactly? What was their experience of that awakening that led them to believe or understand that that in fact was a spiritual awakening? I think it's different for everybody. So I would love to hear what your experience of a spiritual awakening or waking up has been. Personally, I've had many spiritual awakenings over the years, because it doesn't come just in one hit. It's a series of them. For me, my most profound spiritual experience was around 2001. I'll put a link below. It's what I call my story of spiritual awakening. I'll put a link below. You can read that if you're interested. But really, levels of awakening have been coming through for me since the 80s, late 80s. And of course, there's been a feeling of that I've always known things, even through my childhood. And that's really common for many of us. We mostly ignore that spiritual knowing. And even though people say, oh, I've been awake since I was a child, actually what they really mean is that when they have a spiritual awakening later on in their life, they can then look back and say, oh wow, I've actually always been awake. But to be awake and embodied and kind of actualized in that as a child is usually quite rare, although it's becoming more commonplace now, because the kids are kind of wired differently more recently. So if you continue with a regular spiritual practice, you will awaken more and more. You can develop your intuition or your psychic abilities if that interests you, but you don't have to in order to be awake. There are many people very awake that have not developed psychic abilities, so-called, but it's all there within us. We all have it actually, whether we give a name to it and develop it or not. What I've found more often though is that spiritually awake people are not always into what the aware people are into. And more really that the aware people are not into the spiritual part of that. So there is definitely a difference. There's an overlap, yes, but there's also almost like two camps, if you like to think of it that way. So there are people that have been aware that it was a pandemic, not natural, planned, so they are aware of that. And then they say, well, I was awake to that. So this is where the words tend to intermingle a little bit. So these people are aware that it was a pandemic, that it was planned. They are aware of things like chemical trails in the sky. I'm going to be really careful with my words here. They are aware of the ingredients in things that we eat or that we inject, or the things that they put into our water. So people are aware of that. And that's great. I'm delighted, because the more of us that know about that, the better it is, so that we can begin to make, stand up and make some changes, hopefully. The same people often talk about whether it was really terrorists that took down those two towers, or whether it was an explosion they discuss. You might also hear them talking about the gold that went missing from those buildings, or why 3 towers came down. 2 planes, 3 towers. They discuss things like why a certain 5-sided building that apparently had a plane fly into it, why there were no wreckage, aeroplane wreckage, no seats, no fuselage. So there are people aware of that kind of thing as well, which are commonly referred to as conspiracy theories, right? There are other groups of people who talk about the shape of the earth. What shape is it really? They talk about why elaborate buildings were created with doorways the size of giants. Why did we create those? How ornate buildings were created by the same people that went home every night to a mud hut and an open fire because they weren't evolved. And there's other groups of people that investigate why certain documents remain classified when they are of public interest. We would love to read them, but we're not allowed to. Why are we not allowed to? Why are the people who rape and harm children, why are their names hidden from us and protected by law? Why is someone charged with procuring children for sale, for sex rather? Why is she named and shamed, and yet we're not allowed to know who were the very people who asked her to procure the children for them in the first place? Why do we only have certain bits of information and yet we're not allowed to have other parts of information? There are many questions here, and these aware people are asking these questions because in a sense they are awake to the cover-up, right? And then there's the psychology behind all of this, all of what's been going on. Many people don't want to hear about that part, the psychology, the mass formation psychosis, the brainwashing via TV and media, and the trauma actually that people experience that really shuts them down because they're just doing whatever it takes now just to survive and function. They've been shut down. We don't want to know about the psychology of that. Many people don't anyway. So to me, this is all about awareness, and sometimes the spiritual awakening part kind of doesn't make it into the mix with this aware part, and certainly not with the psychology part either. So I found that people in spiritual communities tend to talk about working from their head, their heart, or their gut. So that spiritual stuff tends, the awarenesses and the sensing of energy and, spirit beings and things, that tends to be the domain of the heart. And we're often told in spiritual community groups and things to get out of the head and get into the heart. So many people in these spiritual communities tend to think that anything to do with the head is not their domain. It's kind of like mental mind stuff, 3D, that kind of thing. And also the gut, of course, because the gut is connected somehow to the third energy center, the third chakra. And people say, well, that's 3D, and I'm spiritual, so I'm more evolved in that because I'm in my heart, and that's 3D stuff. I don't want to go there. So we get all this divide of things, right? But the thing is that when we, and it's true as well, I'd say that when we're completely in our head, we are kind of out of touch, with the heart, with the emotion, with that spiritual stuff that we can feel and sense around us. That's for sure. But we mustn't forget that there's the subconscious mind too. And the subconscious mind has a connection to the soul and everything that we've experienced ever, pretty much. So if we don't acknowledge that connection to the soul, we're really missing a huge part of our psyche. And in my opinion, that's why people don't heal and grow as they could, because they're dividing things, into bits and bobs, not seeing us as a whole being. So years back, not completely sure how it happened, but it did. I ended up working with a lot of people coming out of spiritual cults. So all in all, I've worked with actually about 350 people coming out of spiritual cults now. And to be honest, at the time, I was working with them purely energetically as a healer. And I, can sense and see the energy blocks and things like that. So I was working with them at that level. And we had some of them were really great, actually, outcomes. Others, I kind of, to be honest, felt that I couldn't really get in deep enough. And I found that I was lacking the skills to understand the psychology of what they had experienced and actually of what mind control really is. So I've studied now. I have more skills now. And I understand how this mass formation psychosis occurred to the global population. And I understand the conditioning that we have all been subjected to since birth, actually, programming us to behave and think and be certain things and live in certain ways. And so now I combine the psychology with the energy in my work, and it's much more powerful. But still, I'm seeing this divide within people. So their focus is on the spiritual or the physical. But we are both. So we have to focus on both as well. We can't just ignore one part. We can't stick our head in the sand and choose not to look at one part, whether that's, the lies and the cover up or the spiritual part. We are both. We have to combine both. We can't ignore what's happening here on the planet. What has happened here before on the planet either, because we're actually in a repeating cycle right now. And in order to see it and break that cycle, we have to wake up to all of it and become aware of all of it. So it's more than just opening up to one part, it's the whole. And we can't do that if we're not looking all around us. So as spiritual people, I work with a lot of spiritually interested people, and they're into the New Age teachings or the therapies and modalities and all of that. And some of them don't want to look at the conspiracies, let's say, because they feel that that's lower consciousness, but it's actually affecting their day-to-day life. So people are awake or aware in one area, but they tend to ignore the other. And those of us with spiritual interest have been given new age fluff to distract us. It keeps us occupied, and we can't make a decision for ourselves, so we pull out an oracle card, or we go and find someone to tell us, that kind of thing. It keeps us distracted. It also doesn't allow us to really connect with our own inner knowing. And those people that are more into the conspiracy theories, constantly come up against the censorship and the classified documents and things like that. And that keeps them, or us, digging deeper and deeper and deeper to try to find that evidence. But that's a distraction too. And those people that are in trauma of everything that they've experienced, of course not realizing that some of that trauma is not even from this lifetime as well, so that is multiple layers as well. But these people with trauma are kept in a perpetual loop of trying to get clear, really trying to survive, either with meds. Some of those meds put them back into a semi-sleep, or the never-ending talk therapy, or the plant medicine ceremonies, which actually, if they're not carefully, I want to say controlled, but I mean carefully protected, let's say, opens them up to astral entities and possession by darker forces. And, that puts them into even more danger. And then in the spiritual circles, there are two camps. Those who don't believe that dark energies and entities and things like that even exist. And there's those who spend their time trying to clear the dark, not realizing that they have become traumatized by the very dark things that they're trying to clear. So they get caught in that trap too. And we haven't even talked about the ET, alien involvement on the planet, because that's a real thing. To talk about that another day, or else I'll have you here all day. But really what I wanted to say today is that I encourage you to open your mind to other things, not to run around looking at so much stuff that you distract yourself, from doing the inner work, but to be aware that there are other things going on around you and within you, around you, that if you are not awake and aware to them, they will have a profoundly negative influence upon your life going forwards. You can't ignore the physical and what they're trying to do to us on a physical level. You can't ignore that because you're spiritual. And equally, you can't ignore the spiritual and say, well, I'm not into that kind of woo-woo spiritual stuff because I'm more about what's really going on here on the planet. The two come together. They have to. There are influences just outside of our range of perception that are attempting to take control here on the planet again, because they've done it before. Ancient Earth history is not taught properly. If you research what has happened, going all the way back to Sumerian times, you will see really that we're again in this repeating cycle. So we may be 3D humans on a 3D planet, but we're not just that, and nor is the planet. There are energies here, hyperdimensional forces, beings from other dimensions that come into this dimension Or maybe they don't come fully into the 3D as such, as physical. But they have influence from the fourth dimension and beyond, and they influence what happens here in the 3D. So we are not alone in this universe. If we were alone, the government wouldn't have classified documents on UFOs. They wouldn't have sealed off all the documents about Roswell, etc. Area 51, it would all be open. Your job is to heal the trauma in your body so that you can embody your soul. Pure and simple. But it's not quite that simple. It does take work, and that's usually when people opt out and they focus on other things. It's particularly the spiritual stuff, because it's all light and fluffy and it's kind of feel good. But when you put your awareness into your body and you start looking at your blocks and your traumas and why you feel the way you do about certain things, why you're triggered by certain things, when you heal that and clear it from your body, it's like as if the power of your soul can begin to really descend into the body. And that's where you find your power. The power of awareness on many other levels as well, as awakening to more and more of who you truly are. And that's our power, actually. We are powerful beyond measure. Now, they know that. The governments, the controllers, the ETs, all of that, right? They know that. And that's why they do everything they can to try to distract us, feed us rubbish food, stupid stuff on TV, sports, gambling, all the stuff, right? The entertain the masses kind of thing. They try to dumb us down by that. They try to diminish us, our power. But it's our time now. It's our time to wake up. It's our time to take our power back. It's our time to connect with our soul, our spirit, and step into the fullness of who we truly are. And that's how we make changes on the planet. Because when we step into their game and play things their way, it's literally like the Matrix movie. When they go into the Matrix, they are governed and affected by the laws that happen at that 3D Matrix level. When we connect with our spirit, we're expanding and evolving beyond that. And we have the power to see new ways of doing things, approaching things. This is why we can foresee a whole breakdown of the system as it currently is, and we rebuild it from a different level of consciousness. And that's kind of where we are right now. So, as I said, what I would like to say to you today is go inwards, do your inner healing work, so that you can be more soul embodied, because that naturally brings that expansion. And at the same time, be aware of all the things that are happening around you so that you can carefully navigate your way through them, so that you can't be coerced to do things you don't want to do, so that you can't be manipulated to do things that you don't agree with, because you're connecting with your power, and with that power there is always a way to override the coercion and the manipulation. But you have to find your inner strength, your strength of purpose, in order to be able to really activate your power. So that's what I'd like you to give a little bit of thought about today. If any of my message today has kind of rung some bells for you, or resonated, as they say. So, of course, I have a series of options in ways that I can help you in private healing sessions, in courses. Come on into my Facebook group as well. I've recently renamed it because I really want to share a lot more of this type of information in that Facebook group. I'll be going live each Tuesday with a cup of tea, because I always have a cup of tea close by, just for a little chit chat with you to talk about whatever topics are coming up. So join my Facebook group. Of course, I've renamed it to Awake, Aware, Sovereign and Free, because really that's what it's all about. So I hope that you will join me there. I'll put a link below this video. You can always find things like this on my bio on Instagram or my website, which is karenturpin.com. Well, I hope that's a few things for you to think about. Of course, I would love to hear your experience of spiritual awakening. I shared the link to mine if you're interested to read it. And make sure you send me your questions. I would love to help you find some answers and share what I know about this. That's it for today. Have a great week. See you soon.